Right here. All right, I do want to thank Lee for inviting me, but to come and speak again. I participated several times in some of these activities, and I've always enjoyed it. But it is kind of strange to come up here and be in between the sheriff and the tax man. That's kind of strange. One thing that in the afternoons you see all these people that had a lot of coffee and they're trying to hang in here. In the afternoon, you got to either have real good instructors that know a lot of jokes to kind of keep everybody going. But basically, and I'm bad about moving around a little bit. I was hoping I wouldn't have to stay here by the podium, but I'm gonna go ahead and let's talk about this. And I'm gonna cover. Being a military, having a military background. You ever been in any military people here? Yeah, I figured that much. I can see looking at it. There's kind of a way they teach things. I did a lot of instructing there, and that's kind of how I started off. But there's a learning objectives. The only difference between the private sector and the military is that we hope you're going to learn it here. The military said that you will learn. So there's two different ways. But the learning objectives is basically to talk about a unique asset class that is kind of it falls over into several categories, and it makes it complex in terms of appraisal. But I want to distinguish the difference between a timber and a timberland appraisal, okay? And discussion of licensing, and you run into kind of a gopher hole, if you want to call it. I hope there's none of those in here, but I got a lot of gopher holes, so I see them all the time. But the discussion of licensing and qualifications of appraisers is the valuation issue a real estate or forestry problem, or is it both? And what you'll find is that timberland and the assets that all of you love generally crosses over into all three of these different properties. It could be a combination of a changing land use, but anyway, the appraisal process not only is complex from the nature of the answer to the question, but the person who is doing it is of some importance, because it's not always that easy to find qualifications in that area that would allow you to do that. Okay, we want to discuss briefly the appraisal process and when, and sometimes it's not always good, you may be required to get an appraisal of some kind. And we want to discuss also the importance of finding the right appraiser, independence and objectivity of the appraiser, also to define the scope of work that this person is supposed to address for you up front, so there's a clear identification of the appraisal problem and the proposed solution to how to do that. And the intended use of this appraisal. What are you going to do with it? You're going to borrow some money? You're going to give some land to your kids? Are you in a lawsuit? You're going to have court testimony. It's a combination of multiple uses of this product and of this production is being done. Okay, we all love these things, and this is what it's all about. And while I'm here, this is kind of reflective of the timber. This also happens to belong to a well-known United States senator, and I frequently tell him if he don't get their act together in Washington, I'm going to have a misguided logger find this place, okay? I know where it is. I took this picture. There are other things that influence, as Ted was talking about earlier, there are multiple value influences that you have to account for when you're measuring value, or whatever that value may be. We'll talk about that also. This is the kind of value, the older I get, is more important to me. That happens to be my grandson, and we went into the Alabama River Swamp with his first BB gun. So those kind of things are values to the landowner that you can't really, it's hard to put a price on that kind of stuff. Just like granddaddy's got you carved in initials in the beech tree where you killed your first deer. Those kind of things influence the purchasing decisions as well as the price that the landowner will talk about in terms of what they would sell it for, what it's worth. We shot a big hog that day, and I threatened to bring it home to my son and daughter-in-law to get even with them, but I didn't do that. Okay, here's a picture of, we got obviously a field here. Is it timber, timberland, or both? You've got multiple asset classes here. What kind of timber is this? Is it pre-merchantable timber? Is it merchantable timber? We've got different types of land involved in the appraisal process that we have to deal with. And also, you know, the appraisal process itself and the appraisal activity is really a kind of a study related to economics. And really, it's about as much fun as watching hubcaps rush, but it's something that you have to do for your clients because there's a need for this information. By definition, and I don't know if this is exactly right, but an appraisal is an unbiased, supportable, and defensible estimate of value. And it's usually market value. What would a willing buyer, willing seller come to agreement on in terms of a price conclusion about this particular property. Now, an appraiser in the state of Alabama since the early 90s, and the reason I know this pretty well, I was sentenced to a 4-year term. I mean, no, not sentenced. I was appointed to a 4-year term in the 1st Congressional District on the appraisal board in the state of Alabama when we started this as a result of FIREA Act after the savings loan crisis. An appraiser must be licensed as a certified residential, which would explain residential expertise, or a general certified appraiser. A general certified appraiser, 98% of them are asphalt and pavement type guys. Most of them don't know a pine tree from a white oak. But timberland appraisal falls into this complex category that requires a general appraisal license. And although there's a lot of abuses of it, just like other things, but you need to be sure that if you, and I'll talk about this in a second, Dr. Tufts will agree with this, be sure that your appraiser meets the criteria of licensing, okay? Now, what governs the practice of appraisal in Alabama and every state in the United States? The Alabama Real Estate Appraisal Board has authority under the federal government at a state level to regulate and manage and administer to licensed appraisals in the state of Alabama. After 1991, we have what we call USPAP standards. It has to be applicable to all appraisal centers. Real estate appraisal or forestry issue. There's a big potential difference. Why would that be? Most general real estate appraisers, as I say, are not necessarily qualified to appraise timberlands, whether it's a 20-acre place out here in the country or 20,000 acres. And most registered foresters are not licensed to perform real estate appraisals. Okay? There's a distinction. One agency's licensing requirements cannot oversee and burden another legal agency's regulations and rules. In Alabama, the Real Estate Appraiser Board, USPAP standards, federal laws, and also there's a little thing called the IRS, who happens to have their own criteria of approving appraisals. And sometimes that, a lot of people's work never goes to the IRS. But there's criteria that affects validity of the appraisal there. And the forestry practices in Alabama, in every state, is governed by the Alabama State Board of Registration for Foresters. The ACF, which I belong to, the Association of Consulting Foresters, has ethical rules that you have to adhere to maintain a membership. The Society of American Foresters also has performance standards. Okay, when do you need an appraisal? Now we're talking about basically a property appraisal, land, dirt, shooting houses, lakes, ponds, tractors, or sometimes a combination of things. A sale or a purchase, it would be a good idea to know whether you're selling a Cadillac or those Dodge on blocks with no wheels. You've got to know the market. What are you selling? What are you buying? Caveat emptor, you've probably heard that term before. A world that I work in mostly, and Dr. Tufts, best he does, I've lived off the dead for a long time. I do a lot of estate tax work on small and large estates, timber estates, mainly. And I spend a lot of time working on providing appraisals of timber and land for filing a federal estate tax return and gift taxes and this, that, and the other. Where I come from, we have a lot of tornadoes and hurricanes, and up here we do too. So casualty loss issues are a requirement, and that all goes back to what Dr. Tufts will be talking about, your tax basis, your limitation on your deductions against casualty losses. Dr. Tubbs, it's limited to your basis. That's all you can write off. And one thing that I do a lot of, I spend a lot of time with my clients establishing basis for their timber accounts, whether it be pre-merchantable or merchantable, because when you have a timber sale, as he will talk about, there is a taxable implication based upon the profit on sale. Transfer of assets, do a lot of stuff going into family limited partnerships, LLCs, moving assets for estate planning reasons out of your estate into your children, passing difference between evasion and avoidance. Avoidance is legal, tax evasion costs you 20 years. So one is legal and one's not. Litigation issues, I do a good bit of that too. Eminent domain, trespass, access, and a lot of legal related issues that come up where attorneys are in a fight for a landowner over an issue. And I might be getting off the topic. One of the things, I've seen more timber trespass issues in the last 5 years than I've seen in the last 20. 99% of them, and unfortunately, I've had 2 companies on my timber sales, and we do a lot of timber sales. When these guys are in these fancy cutters with air-conditioned equipment, air-conditioned cabs, tell them to never find a landline while inside that cab of that equipment. They're getting lazy and they go find it by running through the woods. Next thing you know, your $10 piece of pulpwood is a $1,000 tree. So it's happening more and more. And a lot of the landowners are not maintaining their landlines. The forest industry basically is left here for the most part. And they used to do a lot of these landline projects. So keep your landlines up. Make sure that the timber operators stay inside the fence. I can't stress that enough. So I get called in sometimes on measuring damages from a timber theft or timber trespass. What do you do when you need a timber appraisal? Now we're talking about trees that are going to be sold here. So once these trees are severed from the ground, they become personal property. They are not part of the real estate. So there's a different concept of value. Now who is qualified to deal with timber? A forester. An appraiser does not have the ability by licensure in most cases to give advice on forestry issues of any kind. I've done a lot of casualty loss work from hurricanes from Louisiana, Alabama, everywhere. I've seen enough hurricanes and I hope I never see another. I'm ready to be through with it. We do some things for financial reporting on timber assets. Asset transfers, timber leases, or a situation where there's a timber reservation, you may be called in to address that. Eminent domain, the pipeline's coming across your property. Alabama Power decides they're going to cut down your danger trees and they're going to cut down a right-of-way to build a new power line. And of course, litigation is constantly involving timber and timber issues. And again, the timber cost basis and depletion studies, a lot of the stuff that I develop actually goes to the accountants. And while I'm here, I want to dig on the accountants a little bit because there's a lot of accountants that are out there and a lot of practitioners who specialize in general things. They do not know timber accounting from day one. So make sure that your experts, ever who they are, lawyers, accountants, whatever, they understand the timber business because this is a different type of bean counter. And most of them do not deal with this. And most of the foresters don't deal with it. They don't understand it. And it is a specialty area. But you're required to have a basis to make deductions. You've got to prove all your deductions. Just because you don't have a basis doesn't mean you're not entitled to getting one done. You have a timber sale, what happens? We've got to pay tax. And there's a lot of horror stories I've seen to tell you why you keep good records. You do not keep good records, you could get your deductions disallowed. Agree with that, Dr. Tubbs? Absolutely. Record keeping. Now, this is the kind of cruising I end up doing. Can you believe that? Now, that's the one I'm going to take the IRS agent to show them. This is the kind of timber we got. Okay. All right, what are the difference between a real estate appraisal and a timber appraisal? Number one, we know that real estate appraisals are land and property is a real estate appraisal function. It is not necessarily a forestry function. Timber appraisal is a licensed forestry practice. Unless the appraiser has competence or retains competence to deal with forest assets, they have no business doing an appraisal on timberland. Okay? Conflicts of interest in appraisal and understanding the roles of market participants. This is the biggest problem I see with landowners. They get taken to the woodshed on a daily basis because they don't know who is playing who. And they think they do. They're not selling timber but once every 30 years, and all of a sudden here comes Joe Bob Billy along with a fancy truck and tells them, man, this is great timber, I'm going to give you $50,000 for it. And then I've had situations where we turned around and handled a sale and got $80,000. I'm not kidding. Be aware of whether you sell a Cadillac or a Dodge. That's your responsibility to your heirs and your heritage. Okay? I'm fussing at you, but I see it every day. Once the horse is out of the barn and he calls me, it's too late. Or anyone else. But be sure that you're dealing with reputable people that are going to give you a fair price and will treat you fair on your timber. So what I do? Excuse me. All right, the appraisal part, the real estate deal, most of you have an appraisal. There's a cost approach, sales comparison, income approach. The different markets, Ted talked about that. There are big differences in whether you're dealing with 80 acres out here that Billy Bob got or 80,000 acres that an insurance company's going to buy. There's different criteria that drive the train on what is important, which, okay, I got 5 minutes, I'll be through. This is like the Army. So what is a big deal as far as methodology varies considerably between the type of asset it is, whether it's a local market that's going to drive it, or whether there's a pension fund that owns millions of acres that's going to drive it. So those criteria that these buyers and sellers use to make these determinations has a lot to do with the technique that you might have to have done, okay? Recreational influences in the marketplace. Up until probably this last year or so, deer meat probably cost about $2,000 a pound. And this is the first time last year, John Ingram in here? John Ingram, you know the forest right there, he is back there. I actually had to go down on a hunting lease this last year in Sumter County to keep a tenant that we wanted to keep. And I was glad to do it. So, you know, and the hunting, the people that bought a lot of property in 2007 are probably upside down right now in terms of dirt value they paid and also probably for the timber if they hadn't, someone hadn't taken it from them already. Okay. Recreational is a big factor. You can get close to one of these urban areas. These fools come out of Mobile, they put on a camouflage suit, leave a law firm, and they turn into a monster within 40 miles of Mobile County. I'm serious. You don't know someone until you hunt with them. They can be your church buddy, especially preachers. Don't take a preacher hunting. All right? Okay. Use of other experts. If you're going to retain, as an appraiser, you're going to retain someone to do equipment for you in a sawmill, or you're going to get a forester to represent you. You have got to understand and know their business well enough to know whether they're telling you something that's wrong or right. Okay? And if you go out here as a real estate appraiser and you start rendering forestry advice, you're violating the Alabama State Registration for Foresters rule. You're in a minefield every time you go out here on a timberland appraisal because you don't know what you're supposed to do here. You can open your mouth at the coffee shop and next thing you know, Jack's calling for a violation of forestry law. We don't do enough to enforce real estate, forestry, or any other practice in Alabama. Only the lawyers and doctors do a good job of that. The rest of the professions, it's like Fort Apache and Bronx. If anybody's ever seen that, it's wide open in a lot of rural areas especially. We got people doing everything but brain surgery out here getting away. Okay? All right, the timber appraisal, how much time I got, Ace? 1 minute? Okay, I got to quit. Timber volume by the cruise, that's the kind of timber you know we just cruised in. Stumpage prices, market studies, Have the person doing the timber appraisal be an unbiased party. And I'm not digging on timber buyers, most of my friends are timber buyers. But I will tell you, they have a role, and they make money off an overcut off of your timber. So use caution when some procurement entity is appraising your timber to buy. I mean, folks. And they have a built-in, in my opinion, a built-in conflict of interest when they're buying timber straight from you, and you don't use diligence and make sure that, are you going to get brain surgery or are you going to a chiropractor? Okay? You better know the difference. Anyone, again, live practicing forestry, how do you find an appraiser? You can get attorneys that specialize that deal a lot with appraisers. CPAs do a lot of work with appraisers, especially forest land appraisers, because we're in and out of their offices all the time. Other landowners that will recommend, just like a forester or another practitioner, landowners could be a good source. The Forestry Registration Board, the Real Estate Appraisers Board, internet, like anything else today, use caution. People got all these fancy, well, I got them, I got Facebook, websites, and all this stuff. It looks good, but make sure it's good. Okay? Phone book is ridiculous. Be careful there. Social media. All right. I think we've got some of these points across, and I got a clear distinction between the real estate appraisal and timber appraisal and how they can be different. Scope of work, independence of the appraiser, conflicts of interest, and the effective date of the appraisal. That's an important part. Usually that's done at a particular point in economic history. After a hurricane hits the next day, the whole world is different. But that date, that value is based on a specific date. It is static, it is not dynamic, and changing over time. All right, any questions?